When I first started gardening years ago, I hand watered all my plants. And that was something that took hours. And as my garden has gotten bigger, it has gotten more and more of a task. So I think it was like 2 years ago, I decided to figure out a way where I can automate watering. And I probably went with the most expensive thing. I went from free, which was hand watering because we're on a well, so I don't have to pay for water, to the other extreme, which is where I had our sprinkler system replaced. That was something we needed to do anyway when we bought this house. The sprinklers were kind of messed up and broken everywhere, so we ended up having them replaced. And as part of that process, we decided to talk to the irrigation guys about putting in irrigation for the actual garden beds. And they suggested to us that we would put these hoses. They're like really hard. There's probably a name for them, but they're these really hard hoses that connect to the irrigation lines underneath the grounds. And then they kind of pop up in the middle of the beds. And then from those pop-up lines, they connected these smaller tubes that connect to micro sprayers. And a micro sprayer is a sprayer that sends out this mist of water across the entire bed. That was awesome. It automated the watering. It keeps my beds well watered, evenly watered, but there was another problem. And that problem was the micro spraying has been one of the reasons, I believe, why I'm continuing to have a lot of disease in my garden. I do all the preventative steps. I do everything that you're supposed to keep disease down, and yet I still have a very significant amount of disease. Now, some of this is because we're in Florida. It's a humid environment with lots and lots of rainfall, so that might be the case. But I don't think that the micro sprayers are helping. So I wanted to move to something similar to drip irrigation, where the water is directed straight at the ground. The drip irrigation doesn't allow the splashing of the water up and onto the leaves, which is what I'm going for. So I am going to be replacing my current micro sprayers with drip irrigation, and I'm going to show you exactly how I do it. Now, I've never done this before. I am not a very handy person, but I figure if I can do it in an afternoon, pretty much anybody can do it. So I did purchase this drip irrigation system. I think it's Carpathian. I got it off of Amazon. It had pretty good ratings. Also, there was a very wonderful viewer who reached out to me because he heard me talk about my drip irrigation a couple times and how I really wanted to switch it out, but I didn't know how. He was kind enough to reach out to me and explain the whole process to me and kind of helped me, you know, select what to use. He suggested some other companies, but he said this one looked fine too. There's just a lot of different ones. I think there's like Rain Point and a few others. I went with this one because it was on sale on Amazon at the time. So now we're going to open the box up and check all the parts. This particular set is like a beginner set. So it has two different kinds of hoses. It has two different kinds of emitters, one called a vortex emitter and one called a stream emitter. And then it has all these couplers, I think is what they're called, but they're how to connect the large tube together. And then they also have smaller couplers for the smaller hose. So all of those things are in these little bags along with those two hoses. It also came with instruction manual, not the best instruction manual, but their YouTube videos were very helpful. This is a very customizable kit, which was awesome for me because my system is a little bit different than other people's system. Because it was so hot this day, I didn't want to do this actually out in the sun in my beds because my camera overheats if it spends more than 10 minutes in the sun. So I thought, let me draw out my bed. So I measured an 8x4 foot rectangle that would match the size of my bed, and then I went and measured where the actual current hoses are that I have, so that way I could kind of draw it all out visually before I actually made any changes to my existing irrigation system. If you didn't have an existing irrigation system like I did, this little piece right here in this large tube is actually what you use to connect to your hose. Now, this is totally different for me, but I want to show it to you guys because it is a really simple design. So the larger hose connects to that, and then they have these little couplers, and you cut the hose at different parts, and then you put this coupler in between the cut parts, and then those little nipples on the bottom there is where the smaller hose with the emitter connects to. Because I am overly organized, I wanted to not only lay it out on the ground in my patio, but I also wanted to draw a sketch of how all the emitters are going to come and connect. This is my old system with the micro sprayer, and I have this brown tube which does not match the sizing of the tubes that they sent. So what I need to do is take my little cutter, my little hose popper, and pop that in and use their smaller hose and bypass the larger hose. Like I said, this is a very customizable system, so it was really cool that it's actually going to work on mine, which was the area that I was most concerned about. So I'm taking my old micro sprayer emitters that came with the system that I have, and I'm kind of breaking them apart because there was one piece that was missing for my setup. You should not need this if you're coming from a hose or a faucet out in your yard, but because I was missing this one piece, they were actually a part of my old setup. So I kind of broke off the old emitter that I had and used the bottom piece, which is exactly the same size as the hose, the small hose that they sent, but it also has a little coupler that plugs into my brown hose. Next, what I'm doing is I'm going to make 4 connections to my hose that connects to my sprinkler system underground. And then I'm going to cut this small tube so that there's 2 emitters on each one of these. So altogether, my bed is going to have 8 emitters. Typically for a sized bed like this, you're going to want 1 emitter per square foot. This seemed pretty excessive to me. That would mean I'd need 32 emitters, and I just don't feel like the water flow from my underground system is going to have enough pressure to accommodate that. So the way that I'm going to get around that is I'm going to use 8 emitters to where each emitter takes and waters 4 square feet, and I'm going to use the vortex emitters instead of the stream ones. The stream ones are, like it sounds, a stream. It's like a drip irrigation. But the vortex one creates a small little spinning water vortex, and it pushes out a lot more water than the stream does. So I feel like that should be able to cover 4 square feet. I'll test it out and just make sure over the next coming weeks, if I start to have any problems, then I can always add more to the line. I just want to try to avoid a problem with the water pressure. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking the little couplers that come for the small hose, which is like a 2-prong. One goes in as a stopper into the hose that will connect to my brown hose, and then the other one are the 2 hoses that are going to go out to the 2 emitters. Now these things are actually pretty easy to put on here, but when I get to the part where I actually connect the emitters, I feel like the emitters were larger. The little hose parts were larger. And so they were much harder to get on. And I ended up doing some YouTube videos to try to figure out what was the best way. And they said get a hot bowl of water. So I went and I got some hot water and I dipped the ends into the hot water. I probably should have let them sit a little bit longer, but it was enough to kind of soften up the plastic hosing so that it would go around the tube of the emitter. Everything is designed to be tight on the emitter so that you're not leaking water. So I went ahead and pushed all of those on, laid everything out here so that I knew exactly what it would look like, so that when I went out into the garden, I wouldn't be dying in the heat spending an hour putting this together. If I put it together here, all I have to do is walk it out and plug it into the brown hose that exists in my sprinkler system line. So this is going to be the layout, as you can see right here, with each one of the 8 emitters in a 4 square foot box. Here's the actual hose I've been talking about. This is the hose that goes underground and kind of wraps around my bed. This is my existing micro sprayer emitter that sprays that water all over the place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that one off, the actual emitter off, and then I'm going to replace it with the one that I had just put together in the patio. And then once I plug that hole into those small tubes, then I just need to put the 2 emitters in their spots, the 4 square feet right in the center. For this part, I really only had 2 micro sprayers in my bed, and I'm going to need to add 2 more holes into the brown tube. So I used my little piercer. It's a little tool that pierces the brown tube, and then I put the emitter plug in there on either side of the bed. I had to climb in the bed to do this. Hopefully I won't have to do that very often. So I repurposed the ones that were already existing on each end of the bed, and then I added one to each side in the center of the bed so that I make sure I have the proper coverage. So I got it all installed and it's just starting to rain. So let's turn on the system and make sure I didn't mess anything up. The system I have is called Beehive, and it has a mobile app which is super convenient, and we actually love it quite a bit. Fingers crossed, guys. Oh my gosh, it's working. Woo. They're pretty intense. It's a little tricky to get them all to spray exactly the way that I wanted to. So you kind of have to go one at a time and adjust them a little bit, and then go to the next one, adjust it a little bit, and then just keep going around until they're exactly the way that you like them. So this is what they look like if they're just dripping. So if I spin it out just a little bit, and I can kind of turn it down if I just want a little bit. Oh man, that's very cool. So let me adjust all the rest of them. This is them at high, which is basically like my micro sprayers. But if I turn them down, that's what they look like. You can turn them all the way down to where they're just a straight drip, a slight little pour, or a bigger pour. So let me get them all set. Okay. Oh wow, this is really, really cool. You just kind of got to play with them, it looks like. And that's it. I am actually shocked I was able to do this within an hour. It is not hard at all. This way is going to be a little bit different than if you were to use it in your garden, but really the kit has everything. And as you can see, if I could do it, you could do it. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I'm so glad we got this project done. Happy gardening, guys.